Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to another video, and in this video we are going to be continuing on with our C# tutorial series, and in this tutorial we are going to be taking a look at how we can use the generic collection known as a queue in C#. Now, a queue is declared and initialized the same way as a list is, and they both store a virtually unlimited amount of values. Of course, you are limited by how much memory your user has, but that's besides the point. It dynamically changes its size based on how many elements are added to it. However, lists and queues have a very distinct difference in that a queue is an ordered collection that follows what is called the first in, first out, or FIFO pattern, and that stands for first in, first out, like I said. So that essentially means that the first element you put into the queue will always be the first one out when you remove stuff. All right. Later on, we'll look at another data structure that does the opposite. But for now, we're going to focus on queues. So, how do we take a look? Okay, how do we take a look at how we can go and add items to a queue then? Well, in order to add items to a queue, you need to use the method called enqueue. There's no add, there's no push, it's enqueue. Alright? So, to start off with, we need to actually create a queue. And to do that, we can do capital Q, UE, opening and closing angle brackets. And inside of those angle brackets, put the type that you want to store in your queue. In this case, we're going to store some integers. All right. Then we need to give our queue a name. So I'm going to call this numbers. We're going to set this equal to a new capital Q, UE, opening angle bracket, int, close angle bracket, opening and closing parenthesis, semicolon. So with that, we have now created our queue. In order to add items to our queue, we need to now call the enqueue method. So numbers dot capital EN QUEUE, and then pass it a value. So let's say 10. Like that. All right. And then we can add more items to our queue. So numbers dot enqueue20, numbers dot enqueue30, like that. So we have 10, 20, and 30 added to our queue. Now, how can we loop through our queue? Well, we can say, let's try using a for each. So for each int number in numbers. And so you can see that this will work. We could console.writeLine number, like that. Go ahead and run your code with Control F5. And you can see we have our 10, 20, and 30 printed out to the console. What if you want to look at the first item of the queue? Well, you can do that with the peek method. And so the peek method will return the first item that was inserted into the queue. And we can assign that to an integer variable. So int first equals numbers dot peek. And then we can output that by saying console.writeLine first. Go ahead and save it and run your code again. And now you can see that we have 10, 20, and 30 printed out to the console like we have in our for each loop there. But then we also have 10 printed to our console. And the reason for that is because we inserted 10 as our first value to be put into the queue. And that's great. But what if we want to print, or what if we want to print the first number of the first value entered into our queue, but we also want to remove it? Well, that is what the enqueue method does. It allows you to remove the first item that was added to the queue. Like I mentioned, first in, first out. So then that value that gets removed is returned by the dequeue method. So we can store it in an integer and then use it to say, hey, say for example, telling the user we removed this value from the queue. So in our code, we can say int first equals numbers, or rather we can say we already have an integer called first, so we'll say first deleted equals numbers dot dequeue, like that. And then we can do a console.writeLine first deleted, like that, and go ahead and run your code again. So now you can see we have 10, 20, 30 from our for each. We have 10 from when we use the peek method, and then we have 10 again from when we are removing our item. Now a queue has various other methods that you can use. I urge you to go out and look at the documentation. In the documentation, you will find all kinds of methods that you can use on a queue. I urge you to experiment with those so you can kind of get an idea for how a queue actually works. It's one thing for me to explain it to you and give you one singular example of how to do specific things with a queue. It's a whole nother for you to go out and read the documentation and actually experiment with it. So go out and do that. When I first learned, that's what I did, and it really does work. Thank you all so very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.